him Lord. How can he be his son? No one was able to give him an answer, and nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in thine eyes, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer.
Amen.
After he had silenced the Sadducees, no one was able to give him an answer. And from that day forward, no one dared to ask him a question. What's going on here? Here is a man who is preaching shocking, life-changing truths about God, about the Messiah, about the people's relationship with God, and yet the religious leaders of the day, the thinkers of the day, have gone silent. Why? What were they afraid of? Well, duh. If I were in their shoes, it would be the realization that my world, my inner world view was wrong. And Jesus was pointing it out to everyone. Just like Fonzie, I'm not sure I could handle being wrong. I would rather keep my old world and think that I'm right. And therefore I would have to be silent, and I would not dare to ask a question that would expose my wrongness. But what if it wasn't wrong? What if it was just incomplete? We grow by asking questions, and by letting the questions and answers add to our worldview. Imagine what you can see of the world if you're just lying face down. Not much. Imagine what you can see of the world when you turn over and get up on your knees and elbows, but still face down, but you're higher up, you're crawling around. You could do that, or you could stay where you were, face down. Imagine what you can see of the world if you actually stood up, if you got off your knees. Or you could choose to stay on your hands and knees. And imagine what you can see of the world if you walk to the top of a hill and look out across the valley that you've come from. Or you could stay in the valley. Asking questions and seeking answers is like that. We add to what we know. I wouldn't say that everything I knew before I stood up and got off my elbows and knees was wrong. I would say it was incomplete. I would say that the things I learned by looking down when I was face down are still true. The things I learned when I was on my hands and knees are still true. But now that I've stood up and I've looked around, from that bigger vantage point, I can put it in context. My earlier knowledge is still there, but now it fits into a bigger picture. There's more to the world than I realized. Things are more complex, for sure, but they also make more sense. I can see where they fit. And when I was thinking about it this way, this reminds me a lot of the laws of motion that we learned in high school. Isaac Newton was able to come up with a way to predict how things would behave on Earth at low speed. An apple falling from a tree, a ball thrown from one person to another, a cannonball being shot towards a castle wall. He predicted how those things would move, very carefully. Albert Einstein, though, several hundred years later, realized that if you measured the movement of those things very, very carefully, you'd see that Newton's math was wrong. It was incomplete. That as you moved faster and faster, the predicted movement was a little bit off. And Einstein asked the question, what happens as we move faster? He asked the question, what happens as we approach the speed of a photon? And he realized that space and time and energy and mass are related and relative, and that as things move faster, time slows down, and things that look straight are actually a little bit curved. Newton wasn't wrong. He was incomplete. Einstein added a couple of extra bits to the end of Newton's equations, and voila, everything matches up perfectly. I can predict it precisely. I've got all of it in there now. Small changes, but they're based on a much wider worldview. Things are way more complex, but they actually make more sense. Everything fits better by asking questions. So just by asking questions and being unafraid to add to an incomplete picture, I now understand that I'm aging more slowly if I ride my bike to work, because I'm going a little faster. And I'm aging a little bit more slowly if I walk instead of sit still. So there's all kinds of health benefits to move. You actually age a little more slowly. All by asking questions and letting your worldview expand and knowing that you weren't wrong, you were just incomplete. So it's a shame. It's a tragedy, really, that the religious leaders we read about this morning chose not to ask Jesus any more questions. It's a shame. Their growth stopped on that day. They were stuck with what they knew at that time. Because the beauty of what Jesus was talking about wasn't to show that they were wrong. They weren't. Their worldview was incomplete. Jesus was encouraging them to add to their worldview, to keep asking questions and add to it. And if you think about it, all of Jesus' teachings show us that we don't see the world as it truly is. We need to continually ask questions about things and make sure we're walking around the corner and going up the hill and meeting new people and learning more stories and getting wider and wider viewpoints, not playing it safe by being quiet and silent and thinking we know what we know. For example, Jesus did not say the law was wrong. He came to fulfill it. He didn't say that the Old Testament was wrong. It was incomplete. And he saw that we were being distracted by the weight of the law, and so he lightened it and narrowed it down to two things. Love your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. He didn't say that the books of Deuteronomy and Leviticus were wrong, just that to focus on them exclusively, we've missed the point. The true nature of serving God is more complex than just a long list of rules. When he said that we must love one another, including our enemy, he didn't say that being angry or hurt or afraid was wrong, but that the true nature of God's love is more powerful than that, and that by loving our enemy we heal ourselves of that hatred and anger and fear. When he told the apostles to go and make disciples of the whole world, he didn't say that Israel was no longer God's people. He was telling us that the true nature of God's love is broader than that. And so he added everyone as God's people. Over the past few months, many of us have been realizing that our view of America is incomplete. We are realizing that the things that we thought that were true based on our own journeys are not universally true for all Americans, and certainly not true for all of God's children on the planet. We've learned that by looking more carefully, that the equation that we thought was true is not true, that there is actually a dimension of skin color in the equation, which some of us didn't know about. And therefore, for some of us, the equation is very, very different. We've learned that for black and brown-skinned, actually for all non-white-skinned people, their experience with banks and employers and doctors and real estate appraisers and passers-by on the street, in America anyway, is very different from the experience of white-skinned people. And our worldview, just like those of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, was not wrong, but for me, at least, it was incomplete. Thankfully, we are willing to ask the questions and seek the answers. A more complete and true worldview is waiting for us at the top of the hill that we are now climbing. It will be more complex, but it will be more true, and it will make sense for all of us. We will need to learn how to use our voice and power to change what needs to change, so that skin color is not a factor in this equation any longer. We must learn how to not let our leaders off the hook, no matter who they wind up being in the next weeks and months. Because we know now that what we've been doing is actually asking some of God's children to wait while we catch up. We must move faster so that time does not pass by too quickly for those waiting for us at the top of the hill. Thankfully, while we ask these questions and encourage our worldviews to get bigger, Jesus is right here, behind us, prodding us on. And he is ahead of us, leading the way. And he is within us, keeping us moving. Thankfully for us, Jesus is the answer. I'll see you out there.